Dokkan makes it a point to add new mechanics every year to keep things fresh and interesting for players, but as time goes on, things tend to change and many of these mechanics become outdated, forgotten, too strong to be used, or for some cases even a hindrance. In this video, I'm going to go over a bunch of older mechanics that you don't really see anymore, and I'm going to give my explanation as to why we don't see them anymore. If I forget any that you know about, make sure to let me know in the comments. Now without further ado, let's get straight into the first entry. Back in the day, there were many different abilities or traits tied to different types of characters. For example, every Vegito used to have a counter, and every Vegito also used to only have damage reduction against normal attacks. Nowadays, that's not the case except for one notable fraudulent Super EZA. The biggest other groups of units to have an ability like this was the Super Saiyan 4 units. Every time one of these units would release back in early Dokkan, they would be released with one of the best defensive abilities in the game, which was nullifying and countering super attacks. This mechanic used to be a staple for every SSJ4 unit and made their teams incredible, since during this time period super attacks were incredibly dangerous for units like Vegito. There was no scouter back in the day, but you were able to just close app during the attack phase, and when you loaded back in, you would be back in the orb collection phase, meaning you could just put an SSJ4 in front of a super attack and your odds of winning would increase by a lot, just because if that chance of nullifying the attack went off, then you were good. Regardless, I think we all know why Vegito's ability isn't seen too often anymore. First off, he was way ahead of his time and way too strong, and nowadays it's way too hard to make it viable but still balanced, since the only way you can make it good but fair is by making another 10th anniversary LR Vegito type of card, and I don't think they're going to do that every time they want to make a counter unit. In the SSJ4 case, it's not nearly as hard to balance, and I expect to see this mechanic return with the 7th anniversary LR EZA and also in SSJ4 Gogeta EZA potentially. The only problem is if there's a way to tell when a super is coming and you have a guaranteed chance to nullify, then bosses become a joke. Yet if the chance to nullify is not guaranteed, then these units could potentially be considered frauds unless they have a good enough defense where they still take a chunk of damage but don't get KO'd. Moving on from that rather complicated section, let's talk about something simple: liking and subscribing on the video. It only takes 2 clicks and helps me out a ton. With that aside, we've got something that got outdated and EZA'd in the wrong era: units that transform every turn. Goku, Frieza, and Vegeta are all units that came out with this gimmick of transforming every turn up until their final form. These cards worked well in their meta where damage was mostly king, but when they got their EZAs, we were in a meta where defense right away was key, and we are pretty much back there now again. The main difference is that during the first time, they had no chance at all, since fights wouldn't even last long enough to fully transform them. But now if they got a super EZA with decent starting defense, they could be actually quite solid in my opinion and would be very fun to use. This mechanic also probably won't make a return since it's way too much effort for the devs and way too little reward. Imagine making 6 or 7 cards all with their own kits and animations just for one unit. So from the dev point of view, I can understand if we never get cards like this again, even if they are really cool. The third mechanic I want to talk about is one that Gotenks used to be known for: specific key amount supers with unique effects. It's pretty self-explanatory. He had 2 super attack animations, the 12/9 key and the 11 key. If you got 11 key, then he did Ultra Boo Volleyball, which did the most damage because it raised attack massively for one turn. The reason this mechanic isn't common anymore is because nowadays it is almost impossible for most cards to have less than 12 key unless there's a special modifier or you're running a wacky team. This type of mechanic is too frustrating to make it worthwhile. Either you run units that don't link well and hurt those units, or you ignore the unique super attack and miss out on the fun part of the character. This is a mechanic I don't really miss or care for, so if it never returns, I think I'll be fine. Up next, we've got nuking. Nuking was more of a strategy back in the day, but definitely still a mechanic nonetheless, considering it was linked to character passives and leader skills. This mechanic died a long time ago, and nowadays the only time you see it is in passive skills, and it's usually capped unless it's an old unit that got an EZA like LR Teen Gohan. Nowadays, a nuke lead is pointless. It's too risky to run a team with no key or HP support, since you would get obliterated by even the weakest bosses, and even if you managed to charge a super powerful attack, you wouldn't even knock out the boss, because bosses have hundreds of millions of HP now, and 99 million is the hardest you can hit a boss anyways. Some units will hit that number even without a nuke lead, so this is definitely a strategy you won't really see anymore. And the developers of Dokkan have no reason to bring it back even if they did make it stronger. Moving on, we've got a more recent mechanic that Dokkan tried to push for in 2022/2023, and that is team conditions. When units first started receiving limitations that required other units of a certain category to activate, people didn't care as long as the teams were good. It was more of a minor inconvenience for units like God Goku, since his team was really strong anyways and so were his abilities. But when it came to a unit like Super Trunks, who struggled even with the team requirement, it was terrible for us since his team was also pretty bad on top top of his already weak kit. Now we have a far more refined version of this, and most characters only need one other character who shares their category for an extra boost, and instead of focusing on buffing the unit with the passive, Dokkan now makes the card good on its own and sprinkles on support for those certain categories as an added bonus and an incentive to run them. The prime example of this is the new SSJ4 Goku, who supports Giant 8 power and power beyond Super Saiyan. Rather than needing them to be good, he makes his allies even better. Now I want to take a moment to talk about Tournament of Power Bergamo, or better known as Bergadmo. This unit was insanely busted for when he was released. Basically, he gained 30% attack and defense for every attack received up until he got to 300%. He also had the ability to gain 30% defense for 9 turns when supering. This mechanic actually is still seen to this day, but never up to this amount of 300%. This unit was the best defensive unit for hard content in the game when he was released, since he could easily and quickly stack up to a point where he'd just tank every attack. Nowadays, you don't really see units that stack for more than 4 turns, and if you do, it's usually just permanent stacking. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong though. I just thought it was worth mentioning this legendary unit that came out of nowhere and dominated for a short amount of time. Something else we almost never get to see anymore is random chance stat boosts. Well, besides SSJ3 Gotenks, we haven't seen it be used in a while. Units like Champa and Tech free-to-play Namek Goku had this type of passive where they didn't have anything to help them except luck. Goku and Champa literally just got a fat attack boost and nothing else. Dokkan was definitely very different back in the day by including gambling even during events. Obviously, this is a bit of a stupid mechanic to have, especially in modern content, and the Kid, Goten, and Trunks show this quite well, since if they don't get all their stat boosts, they kind of fall off and can cause you to lose the fight you're on. I think it's fun, and I wouldn't mind seeing this type of ability again as long as the unit has good base defense, so the extra massive attack boost is just a fun bonus if you get lucky. I can't make this video without talking about Tech Caulifla and her guaranteed dodge. When she was released, this was a very harmless part of her kit, since almost no hard events had pure Saiyans as the boss besides Broly, but now with all the different types of fights in the game, she's become way more useful. To counteract this, they added guaranteed hit into many fights, but Dokkan will probably never make a unit like this again, since guaranteed dodge makes the unit 10 times as useful. Even if the links and damage are trash, she's a great filler unit in events that don't have guaranteed hit bosses. This is more of a lesson learned type of scenario rather than being outdated. And the last thing I want to talk about is something that has become almost completely pointless in Dokkan. Can you guess what it is? Well, if you guessed SR units that awakened into URs and TURs, then you'd be right. Dokkan has essentially gotten rid of this concept. I believe the main reason they don't make units like this anymore is firstly since the hidden potential system makes maxing these units a grind fest, and after all that grinding you're not even getting anything useful. Super Strike events are the only useful units that start as SRs, and even they can be a bit of a hassle to max out. Most of the time though, these SR units are only Dokkan awakened to be used as super attack fuel, and as more events came out that drop SSR free-to-play units, there's really no reason for these units to exist anymore. I wonder if one day Dokkan will give SR units a purpose in general, because as of now, they might as well just be 500 Baba points. I hope one time in the future Dokkan drops a completely OP SR unit as a banner card. I think that would be super cool, since he could literally pop in at any multi. I don't like to bring up legends, but at least lower rarity extreme units in that game are still usable to a certain extent. Anyways, if you made it this far, please subscribe and check out one of the videos on screen. Thanks for watching.